Hope everybody is doing well. It's time for another online dinner party where we have amazing guests sharing their stories and different things that they've got going on in their life and things that they can help us in terms of learning life lessons and all along those lines. I just finished coming back from a meeting with one of my cohorts over there at Pod TV. So definitely met the two owners as well as our engineers that's helping us keep all these programs aligned and all along those lines. So it was good spending time with them over at Duke and having a little bit of a meal and also enjoying some of the warmer weather, even though it's overcast here in Durham, North Carolina. So on a couple of days ago, it was actually sunny, and I had spent some time on Duke's campus as part of their service week, talking to some of the students over there about Hayti, which is part of the old Black Wall Street here in Durham, North Carolina. We know that there are several of those Black Wall Streets that existed, including Tulsa, Oklahoma, Rosewood, Florida, Wilmington, North Carolina, and a number of others that had active communities, active, very successful African American communities that unfortunately were destroyed in some cases by urban renewal and in some cases by literal destruction, such as what happened in Wilmington with the fires and in Tulsa with some of the bombings and other things that took place. So definitely there was actual destruction in some cases, and in some cases it was the whole nursing of urban renewal. And of course, some people have been paying attention to what was going on in the world as we definitely had another primary, and it looks like we're heading toward the election of the two folks that are of the older population. So it definitely looks like we're heading toward a presidential rematch between Trump and Biden, despite the fact that that's a lot of folks were hoping we would not get. But it doesn't seem like there's going to be any change in that. And it doesn't look like Nikki Haley will be breaking through. And it doesn't look like Gavin Newsom will be riding to the rescue, or even Michelle Obama or anybody along those lines. So it does look like we're heading toward a rematch. But hey, stranger things have happened. So maybe there'll be some other news that goes on in that space. Y'all can't tell it because I don't have it all that much revealed in this particular camera shot, but I'm actually enjoying college basketball because my team is actually ranked in the top 10 and might even be cracking around the top 5 because I am a proud graduate of Marquette University there in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So we've done well. Did not do well when we played against Connecticut, but hopefully we'll get revenge on them when they come to our court in March and all along those lines. Of course, we are the defending Big East champions in terms of the conference and in terms of the Big East tournament last year, even though we know Connecticut, that is currently in first place, is the reigning national champion. So we'll see how this all plays out and if we can maybe get another crack at them or maybe even another 2 cracks. And who knows, it was almost 50 years ago that we lost to North Carolina State. As a matter of fact, both North Carolina State and Marquette were celebrating that 50th year anniversary. So I think at Marquette this past weekend, Bo Ellis was in attendance, as was Earl Tatum. And here in the Raleigh-Durham area at the North Carolina State game, definitely David Thompson and Monty Tao. And you're talking about a Mudd and Jeff combination. They were definitely a Mudd and Jeff combination back in that day. They were in town because Monty Tao was a very short guard and David Thompson was definitely towering in height, but they were both in town in Raleigh and celebrating that 50th anniversary of that game that was in 1974. And we're in 2024, and some of them look still relatively young, or not young, young at heart, and all along those lines. So it was definitely good to see images of that, even though I did not attend either game. I did see images online and on television. So that was just good to see. And like I said, hopefully there will be a chance for us to repeat our 1977 championship, because the only championship that Marquette ever had was in 1977 under the great leadership of Al McGuire. But now we've got Shaka Smart and all along those lines, and he seems to be doing a good job as a coach. So like I said, I've got some amazing guests. Get ready to bring them in, learn a lot about them, see what they've got going on in their life. And one is actually one that can definitely resonate with that whole conversation about people being young at heart. So the first guest that I'll bring in is none other than Deb Kelly. So you heard me talking about the fact that I am in my early 60s. As a matter of fact, I'll hit the big 6'2" in July of this year and everything. My brother, actually, I joke, will turn the speed limit 55 because there's a 7-year gap between us when he hits that mark in October. So he was an October baby, so he'll be hitting that mark in October of this year. So he was born in 1969 and everything. And like I was telling you off camera, I don't have any kids of my own, but I do have my 2 nephews. So they are, every time I turn around, it seems like I thought that there was a contract. I was actually telling a friend of mine about this, and maybe you can help me with this contract and everything, and maybe some of these other guests can help me too. But I thought that there was a rule that they were not supposed to get bigger than us and taller than us and smarter than us and all along those lines. But I remember when my nephews were born and they were very short and small babies and everything. And now when they come, because I get around by mass transit, and sometimes my brother will pick me up if we're going to visit mom or other places that we may be going, and I'm going like these kids are bigger than I am and everything. So, I thought that that was not supposed to be in the contract and all along those lines, but I think that they did not get that memo, and I'm trying to figure out how I can get them to get the memo back and everything. That's one of the things about life is that as you get older, you age, and as you age, other folks are aging as well. So what you may remember as being something that is small, you then wind up seeing that they are not small anymore. And I don't know if you like this, Deb, but my mom, as I recall, I want to say it was when she was in her 40s or 50s, she said she was going to start counting backwards. So I actually kind of put that in a different kind of perspective. I said that when I turn 50, maybe I'll count backwards. So that means that when I hit 85, I will actually be 15, and then we can start counting back the other way, which means by the time I get to 100, I would be 30. So I'm liking this new math that I have created and everything. But I don't know your thoughts about this, because we were talking about how a lot of times you have to be young at heart no matter what's going on in your life. And you are an author that has written some great children's books. But what do you think about my new math, and will it work?
Well, when you said 55, your brother is 55. I'm just in the midst of planning my 55th high school class reunion. Wow. And when you say he was born in 1969, that's the year, of course, I graduated from high school. And, it's true, it just goes so fast. And everybody tells you that. I happen to be 73. And I just keep saying, oh my God, I can't believe I'm 73, And my grandchildren, I have 8 of them, and 5 of them are in college, are heading to college. Some of them are graduating this year. And, it all goes fast. But like you and I were talking about your mom and dad and how youthful they are in their 80s. It's a way we have to think. It's a way we have to be, and I'm working right now on doing some more walking and doing some more bike riding. And last fall, I decided I had to give myself some kind of goal. So I booked a trip to Switzerland and hiked with my friends. I met them over there and hiked, and it dropped some of the weight off of me and got me feeling good. But then you know how you do. You go back to your old cycles. And so here I am again, starting all over.
We were talking earlier off camera and everything about how a lot of times folks do not think about African Americans as being skiers, and we were kind of joking about that, even though there are some even skiing groups that go out on trips, and they might be going to like Colorado or other things that are trips of a different groups. I think there's some women's ski groups, and there are definitely some African American ski groups. I know that me and snow and ice are not good friends, because several years ago I was actually working at a radio station and was being kind of, I am now, very kind-hearted. So I said that I would cover for somebody when they were having some issues. So I went trekking toward the bus terminal. The buses were not running because we in North Carolina are not good with ice and snow and all along those lines. So then I decided to trek toward the destination, which is probably a good, I would guesstimate 3 miles away and everything. And after I got maybe a mile into my trip, I literally tripped and fell and busted my arm. And definitely, even when you have that pain, I remember falling, hearing the crack, and literally thinking to myself, oh, that's no problem, I'm good. And people were driving by and asking if I needed help. And I'm like, no, I'm good. And then I started to feel faint. So I then found a substation nearby. I think it was a city substation at that particular time. And they called the EMS, and the EMS got me to Duke Hospital. They gave me a cast on my arm, and I had that cast for a few months and all in that space. And I still think to this day that sometimes if the weather acts up, my bone might be acting up as well and everything, even though that was at least a decade, if not more ago, that accident took place and everything. But I was sitting there going like, yeah, that's what I get for trying to be kind to folks. I thought I'd be good. And literally I went down there and I just remember slipping and falling and going like, oh, that's not nothing. I'm good. But I was not good.
Yeah, it's amazing what happens when you get older. I just want to say, be thankful you're not here in Truckee, California, because tomorrow we start, I think it's 4 days of snow, and they're expecting, where I am, it's just a little below 7,000 feet, and we're going to have maybe 4 feet of snow, and then the mountains are going to get, 5, 10, who knows? I don't know. So my dentist this morning, she goes, well, we're going to have 10 feet at 3,000, elevation. I said, don't be telling me those stories. But last year, I forget, we had like 100 feet of snow or some crazy thing like that. So I'm used to that snow, but you have to be careful.
You definitely have to be careful. One of the things I'm definitely going to bring in some of our other guests as well, but one of the things I was curious about is I mentioned that one of the ways that you are described, particularly when I found you on Podcast Guest, is as a visionary grandmother. And I'm going like that you are on a mission to cultivate a kinder world. And you've definitely written some of the children's books that you kind of alluded to, and also founded an online wellness program. So I was just wondering what got you into this notion of writing children's books. And I know that one of the things you talked about earlier when we were talking backstage is this notion of wanting to make sure that the book was representative, that it wasn't just kind of like the traditional individuals like Hansel and Gretel that might be more European, but you wanted to make sure that there was representation of different cultures and maybe even different religions within the books. I was just wondering if you could talk about being a grandmother on a mission and the importance of the reasons that you came up with this notion of wanting books that everybody could read, no matter what their cultures were.
Well, I'll give you a quick outline. All my life, there was a voice in the back of my head said, you'll be a teacher of teachers. And I'm like, no, I'm not. Because I knew if I ever went to school and became a teacher, they'd fire me right away because I'm so much of a rebel. But I'm a learner and I love learning. And so all my life I've learned, I've taken tons of seminars in personal growth and gone to, I think, 5 different colleges, never bothered to graduate because I didn't think it was important. But midlife crisis, I decided I needed to get away and I divorced my husband and I walked miles across America and learned about people. It was back just after 9/11 and I can't believe it. I don't think everybody's afraid. I just want to know. And America is a very generous and very kind, especially in the rural areas where I was walking, people that, were interested in my story. They wanted to know what I was doing. And it was really an opening for me to grow up. So when I arrived in Tahoe, my children were starting to have babies. And I said, I'm really good at raising babies because I had 4 of them. Yeah. And as they grew, the kindergarten, the little kids, as they got into kindergarten, I started a program called Rearrange Yourself, teaching kids how to calm their minds. And then my children asked me to help them build a family business, which we did, and it became very successful. And when I was 65, I said, okay, now it's my turn. I'm going to do my thing. So I started my online program about 7 years ago, maybe 8 years ago, and started writing these books and found an extraordinary illustrator who worked with me. And what we do is teach kids about their thoughts, because the object of human life is to become aware of what you're doing. And most of us aren't. And I had someone a long time ago say, you really won't become alive and well and know what you're doing until you're about 51. In other words, we become so robotic and programmed through life. And getting through that in my life, I recognize the importance of us sharing new ideas to our children. And they're not new ideas. It's just that we don't teach them in the education system. And it's teaching kids how to think and not everything is real. Just because it went through your head is not a true thought, and helping them to understand and recognize that. And then we teach them a calm mind, how to be calm, because a calm mind is the only mind that really learns. Everything else is like, brrr. And we have 8 principles. We go through all the principles. We teach them about their inner guidance system, their, inner intelligence. And it just goes on and on, these 8 steps that they take, and then they get to truth. But we don't teach them truth. We teach them, now these things, find your truth so that you can navigate your challenges and your achievements. And because you have to navigate both and know and become aware. And it's been a wonderful program. I've been teaching it in private schools mostly, and I'm ready to get it out into the world. And the online courses are great. And our goal is to get parents to work with the kids on this. These lessons are only they're less than 10 minutes, but parents have forgotten the things that we're teaching their kids, and they'll say, oh my gosh, I need this as much as anybody. Do you have an adult version, and I'll say, this is the adult version. We need to go back to our childlike wonder. And that
Right.
brings us right back to, being childlike and happy and full of life, no matter
No,
what
no
age.
doubt about that. And everything as you were saying, I was thinking a couple of things. One is that one of the companies that I work with is I definitely work with the Hayti Center, which is a cultural arts center that I alluded to earlier and everything. But I also work with one of those companies that I know a lot of educators are not the biggest fans of. And you kind of alluded to the fact that you're not the biggest fan of it. But sometimes we have to do jobs that we do for money in order to survive. But yes, I do work for one of the larger measurement companies in terms of school testing and all along those lines. But I do know that sometimes people are frustrated because they think that some of our teachers are teaching to the test and not necessarily teaching critical thinking. So as a writer of a children's book, I just wanted your take on standardized testing, because like I said, I do work for one of those companies and I have some issues, and I'll just be forthright about that, even though I work with them, even with the nature of what goes on. But I just wanted your take on standardized testing, because like I said, I do work for one of the larger ones in the region.
Well, Mark, we've been programmed to believe that that's extremely important. That 2 + 2 is 4. And when you take that standardized test, you better know that it's 2 and 2 is 4. But in actuality, if you go deeper, there's more than just 2 + 2 is 4. And what I said earlier to you when we were talking privately, our world is the standardized test. Mm-hmm. And it's not working right now. It's just not sustainable. And we really need your company to reevaluate what to test. And right. What we need to test is, hey kids, do you know how to research things? Mm-hmm. Let's do, how does your thoughts work? How does your human operating system work? How does that work? Oh, you don't know? And those are the things that we need to test. Oh, do you know how to write a check? Oh, well, we don't write checks anymore. I just went to Whole Foods the other day, and she goes, put your hand in that. I go, what for? And she goes, you're going to pay. And I said, I don't know what you're talking about. But now we're going to start paying with our hand imprint. I'm like, what? But, so we have lots of things. But I'm not against standardized testing, but we're testing the wrong things.
No, I definitely agree with you that we're testing the wrong things and all along those lines. So I can definitely agree that that is part of the problem. And I like what you said about childlike wonder. I was telling you earlier, I'm getting ready to bring on one of our other guests as well. So I'd love to hear what Mike Van Pelt has to say and some of our other folks as well, because we've got a number of other guests that I want to have the conversation with also. But I told you that during the pandemic, I had been reconnected, and I need to reconnect again with IPC, who used to work with George Lucas and was a founder of an audio troupe called the Funky Eye Puppet. So it's some people that were in the acting background and some people that weren't in the acting background, but they were creating like these cartoon-like characters and other things that we were doing even on Clubhouse. And we had different characters. As a matter of fact, my character was named Echo. There was another one that literally was a talking blender named Blender, and all along those lines. So we were discovering our childlike wonder, because one of the things that IPC talked about is how once we got into the adult late neighborhood and we realized we had to pay bills, sometimes we forgot about that childlike wonder and didn't do enough with our childlike wonder and kind of abandoned it. And sometimes even in our own personal relationships, we didn't do enough around maintaining that childlike wonder and that kind of feeling that we had when we were kids and discovering new things. I know even going outside, I will enjoy, even though I live in Durham, and Durham is a relatively decent sized city. I mean, it's not like a Charlotte or an Atlanta, but it's still a relatively decent sized city. But we do still have rabbits and deers and other things, even butterflies. And sometimes I will be amazed at the wonderment of them flying around or fluttering around and everything. And sometimes I'll even take a moment to pause and observe them, or even if there's a cat in the windowsill of a neighbor, might pause and observe that as well. And I don't know that enough of us do that because we're so busy rushing here and there and everything and not spending enough time to actually absorb that childlike wonder and everything. But I was wondering your take on that, and then we'll bring in Mike Van Pelt, learn a little bit about him and my other guests as well. But definitely, I just wanted your take on that as we bring in some of the other guests, and I definitely want to learn about Mike and what he's got going on as well. But definitely share your thoughts around, are we doing enough to maintain that childlike wonder?
No, but there are people that are bringing it out. Having childlike wonder is being vulnerable. Because you're showing yourself like, and you're showing this amazement and this awe and I forget what the guy's name is. That just wrote a book down in Berkeley about awe and things. Like we need to step back to that. We've become, like robotic. We've become programmed, and in order for us to shift so that my 8 grandchildren, have a great life, we have to go back to that being vulnerable and looking at things and say, I didn't know that. I mean, how many people do you know this? I always say, gosh, I didn't know that. And they'll go, what do you mean? People are afraid to admit they don't know anything. And that's one of the biggest problems with that standardized testing and all of that stuff. So what if you don't know it? You're still going to learn it. We have growth mindset and that sort of thing. So I'll shut up because I can't wait to meet Mike.
No, definitely looking forward to meet Mike and learn more about Mike. I was just going to say really quickly to your point, and then I'm definitely going to bring in Mike and learn more about what he's got going on. But I have a dear friend of mine that is in the gospel community and definitely in the Christian community, but she is the mother of 4. And as far as I'm concerned, you kind of talked about your own kids. I think that she is in some ways more in love with her, I won't say 6 or 7, it might be as many as 8, like you've got grandkids, as she is with her own kids. Because while she definitely is glad that the kids came into her life, even though the husband that brought the kids into her life, she is not the biggest fan of and all in that space, but she definitely is. Every time I call her, she seems to be doting on those grandkids, and some of them are very young. I think there's one that might even be like less than a year old and everything. But I just wanted your take on being a doting grandmother. And I know that sometimes you mentioned being I think you said a divorcee, or maybe it was a widower. And I know sometimes that becomes an issue as well, because sometimes people still want to have that social life, and that can be a burden. Because I've had, my cousin has got a step family and a step grand family. And I know that when he first got involved with that young lady, there were family members that were teasing him, going like, you're not just getting an entire family, you're getting an entire grand family as well. But he seems to be very happy in that relationship that he is part of.
Yeah. Well, they're wonderful children are, and I can't say enough about them. But now they're so busy. My grandkids are so busy. I just, send them care packages and write them notes, and they call me every once in a while and that sort of thing. So yeah.
No doubt. Mike, share a little bit about what you've got going on. Like I said, the way I do this dinner party is I invite various people on and we learn about each other. Some of the commonalities, we'll probably get to the work-life balance. I was kind of alluding to that with Deb and everything. And another topic that I talk about quite a bit, which is the inner critic. And we've got a few other people that we'll be bringing on as well. But share a little bit about yourself, and we'll get into a couple of questions from you as well. But just share a little bit about what you've got going on and what your life mission and life journey is all about as well.
Yeah, thanks, Mark, for having me on. So I'm a Christian men's life coach, and there's a lot of reasons behind all of that. But so I started a company called True Man Life Coaching, and I have a podcast called True Man Podcast. And True Man really came about out of my men's small group that I was a part of. I was south of you at the time in South Carolina. I spent a lot of time in North Carolina. I love North Carolina. But our men's small group, we named it at some point, True Man. And the reason for that was quite simple. We didn't feel like the world needed another iron sharpens iron. We were trying to be original, and we felt like the best role model that we could follow was Jesus Christ. So we chose True Man, Jesus Christ walk on earth as a true man. And, it was what happened really was I was trying to find myself in the world at a certain point, and it was channeling the men in that group and leveraging their strengths at times when I didn't have it available. I'd really kind of lost my identity there. I was drowning professionally, and really started these men's small groups with a partner. And we actually landed out on a retreat center. And that's really where things started to happen for me in the spring of 2019. Now, I had been a Christian my entire life, but I did not know that intimacy with Christ was available. And it was at that retreat where I learned that it was, and that God really wanted to have an intimate relationship with me. And it really began to transform my life. And when I looked around the sea of men that were there were about 300 that weekend. I thought to myself, whoa, And where do these guys go when they leave here?
Right.
Like, who's there to help guide them? Because one of the things that I feel like is there's so many different stereotypes and things that have gone on in our culture. And men are strong when we unify together and we learn from each other. We're built for that. It's part of our DNA. But we like to isolate ourselves. And when we isolate ourselves, we do a lot of stupid things. And not only that, isolation is bad. Isolation leads to, loneliness. Loneliness, is now being called an epidemic in this country. So, and then you get into mental health issues. But, my goal is to help men be better men, better dads, better fathers, better husbands, better sons, whatever that takes. And from time to time, guys just need somebody to talk to. They need to because we bury stuff. This is what guys do. I mean, come on, let's just call it what it is. We bury stuff in our souls. We hope we never have to deal with it. And sadly, I can predict what will happen. Your relationships will stink. You'll either have a bad relationship with your children, or you'll have a bad relationship with your spouse. Maybe you'll go through multiple marriages and you'll blame the spouse every time and never stop once to look in the mirror and go, oh, wait a second.
The problem could be me. The problem could be me. Look at as Michael Jackson said, the man in the mirror can be something that, and I know I've been guilty of that as well, having to look at the man in the mirror and realize that part of the problem might be my own situation and the way what I am bringing into the relationship. So I can hear what you're saying and everything, but I've got to teach you, Mike, before we bring in some of the other guests. For two things that were, as you were talking, I was thinking about it. I don't know your thoughts about either of these, but one is I have a phone and a new phone recently and everything. And, you get all these lovely apps, and a number of them are AI apps telling you about your latest game gadgets. And some of them will tell you that if you play games that you'll win all this money. What they don't tell you is that you have to download the various games in order to win the money and everything. They'll just tell you, Cash Giraffe or whatever they're called. But the catch is that you actually have to download the games. And as we know, most phones only have a certain amount of memory in the first place. So there is a catch to winning. Not saying that they won't pay out and that you can't win, but there is, as many things, there's a catch. And one of the catches that I saw in there was I got one of those recently, and it was, and I'm not knocking audiobooks. Audiobooks can definitely help with education. It can help with all kinds of education. But when you have an AI voice telling you that that Jesus is going to want you to win in 24 hours, your cash gift and all along those lines, and it is audio selling the King James version of an audio book of the Bible, I'm going like, this is going a little bit too far in my mind with Christianity and everything. But literally, that's just one that's popped on my phone at least 3 or 4 times in the last 2 or 3 days. And I'm going like, yeah, y'all are doing that kind of the guilt trip version of buying this audio book and everything. I don't know if you stumbled across those yet.
Well, no, listen, AI has become a very important part of my business. My view of it is you either need to figure out how to adapt to it, or you're probably going to die at this point because it's not going to go away. And once technology's out there, we all know this, it's out there. I mean, I remember my wife's first phone was a bag phone, didn't look anything like this, right? It was a brick, man. Right. So technology's not going to go away. But here's the problem with AI and really technology in general and these stupid phones we carry around, and because we're all addicted to them. We're losing out on relationships. It's killing us at every level. We don't have good relationships with our kids, our grandchildren, with each other. I tell this story all the time. And I don't know why this sticks out in my mind, other than at the time I was playing this position. A kid took a baseball in the mouth, but I remember playing in the outfield when I was 12 years old, and I remember looking into the bleachers, and all I saw were all the parents, and they were sitting next to each other, and they were actually talking. Yep. Now, this is a true story. They were actually talking. Now, if you go to a ball game today, what will you find every parent doing? Sitting there staring at their phone. Mm-hmm. And this is dangerous. We don't know how. My son is in college, and last night we were talking to him about the club he was in and essentially how to build relationships in that club. They don't know how. They literally at 21 years, 20, 21, 22, whatever, I'm getting old. They don't know how to talk to each other anymore. And it saddens me to think that, but it's not just the kids. So I'm not going to
put just the kids, it's the adults. I live around the corner from several restaurants, and it's kind of like a restaurant row, and there are popular ones like Firehouse and Enzo's and Chipotle, one of the Chipotles, and all along those lines. And I can tell you that quite often, if you go into those restaurants, it will be entire families that are having conversations with other people on other through their devices, and not necessarily talking to the people that are in the room with them and everything. Before I bring on another one of the guests, and like I said, we got several in the conversation. We usually spend about an hour and a half, so we still got plenty of time to get to everybody and everything. But one of the things that I remember when I lived in a different apartment complex, I lived around the corner from a like a storefront church, for lack of a better term, even though it was in a regular building, but it was a small church building and everything. And I remember going by there, and I went to one of the men's groups, and it was a very good man bonding group and everything. But one of the things that I've seen in that church, as well as other churches, and I don't know your thoughts because you did mention the fact of being a Christian gentleman and all along those lines, is to me, and I don't know if Deb agrees with me, it seems that sometimes there is almost a double standard in what we teach, even in the church environment. Because one of the things that frustrates me sometimes, and like I said, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, Mike, is that sometimes there is this notion of kind of like, if I can borrow from the R&B song, men shop around, whereas women are supposed to be pure as driven snow. And to me, that's almost a contradiction and everything. And I'm not saying all churches do that, but some churches do. And that's where I sometimes have a problem and consider myself more spiritual than religious. But I just wanted your take on that, Mike, because that is one of the issues I have with some organized church. And it's not just Christianity. I've also seen it in the Muslim faith. I've also seen it in some of the Eastern European faiths and a number of other faiths, where it's almost like a double standard that exists in our various religious communities.
I don't know about double standard, but I'll say this, and this is just me being raw, because that's how I am.
Right.
Churches have failed men, and that's a shame. Churches don't always talk about what needs to be talked about in church, because they have to pay the light bill, and they wouldn't want to piss everybody off. Mm-hmm. And so, there's a little of that has gone on. And I believe this: when we have strong men in a church, we have strong families. When we have strong families, we have people that are tithing. We have strong churches. When we have strong churches, we have strong communities. When we have strong communities, we have a strong country. We don't have that right now. Now, the men's groups that I'm a part of right now are outside the church walls. Mm-hmm. And whether a Bible is present or not, I can tell you this: the Holy Spirit is. And when you're a part of a men's group, you need to be intentional about having more than inch deep conversations. It's okay to talk about the Marquette game, although I wouldn't, but that's me. I'm just kidding. Marquette actually has a very good team this year. It's okay to start off with those things, but as men, what I believe a lot of men want to talk about, they want to talk about their wives and their families and their jobs, and they want to know how to do better at those things. And we learn from each other in those environments where we talk about those things. One of the bigger topics that I've found in every men's group that comes up is anger. And most of us land in the spot of, well, I was on the way here and this guy cut me off in traffic and I had to give the guy the business and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. How do we know what happened in that situation? How do we know that person that cut you off isn't on their way to the hospital, or, whatever the case may be? But one of the things I talk about a lot is the ability to pause in those moments where you think you're going to flip your top and just go over the top. And I think it's important for men to have those discussions.
Right. Along those same lines and everything, I definitely agree it's important to have those discussions. And like I said, Gary, bringing another woman into the conversation as well. But one of the things that frustrates me is there's a word, and I've been called this word several times myself, and I don't mind it, but definitely empathy, I don't know is always as used as much as it should be. I know that recently, and I mentioned it earlier, I get around by mass transit. We'll get around to my cultural center I work at later on today by mass transit. But when I was there, I think it was on Sunday, there was a gentleman that literally got stuck in Durham. And I was actually telling my coworker and the boss of this network this and everything. He got stuck in Durham, and he asked the police officer how to get from the Durham area to the airport. The police officer told him to go and catch the bus to one of our malls, Briar Creek and everything, and then to walk to the airport, which is probably about a 3-mile walk and everything. And in the back of my mind, even though I didn't have any money to give to him to help him in the process, I was like, and then the police officer did tell him that he could catch an Uber, but it sounds like the guy was short in the cash. And I'm thinking to myself, you're a police officer, you can make a courtesy ride and everything, not just tell the guy to go to a mall and then walk about 3 miles with, and then he might have had limited luggage, he might have only done one bag or two, but that is not a short walk and everything. So I did not feel that the police officer had as much empathy as he probably should have had and all along those lines. And I get it, the police officers, because of what's happened in the world with police and everything, are maybe concerned that the person may attack them or may cause them a situation. So he might have been protecting his own. And like I said, he was getting off work himself. So he might have been like, I'm not trying to go on a courtesy ride because I'm ready to end my day. And, security at a police officer work, which is basically security at a bus terminal. Not saying that things don't happen, because there are fights there on occasion, but I would think it's a relatively cake job and everything. So he's probably glad to be getting off and didn't want to stretch his day out and everything. And that's just me guessing. I didn't talk to any of the individuals other than the officer briefly and everything, but that would be my guess as to what happened. But I think
empathy is an overall cultural problem that we have right now, because nobody wants to get involved, because if you do, you might find yourself sitting in front of an attorney, and that's just where we're at. It's a shame.
It is very much a shame and everything. That's what I was thinking, even as I was talking to that particular gentleman. So I'm going to bring in, I think we'll start off with Heather and see what Heather's got going on and learn more about Heather. So how are you doing, Heather? Glad to have you here. Like I said, I've got a couple of more guests, but share a little bit about your life. We've got this amazing author, which is Deb. We've got the gentleman that is working in the Christian community and Christian man's groups and all along these lines, and we've got some other people to be coming on as well. But share a little bit about yourself, because one thing I love doing these dinner parties is inviting various people on, and I get to learn about them, and they get to learn about each other. So your turn, Heather. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Great, thank you. Well, my business partner and I, Anne, who I think is somewhere in the hovering in the background as well, we work with primarily organizations. We help organizations and the leaders within the organizations to navigate some of the challenges that come about when we bring people into organizations, and some of the dynamics and dysfunctions that are a normal and natural part of organizational life. And sort of leveraging off of some of the things that you've been talking about, a lot of it gets created because there are these gaps that have happened with respect to their development. So people haven't had the opportunity to really develop, to grow, to become self-aware, to develop emotional intelligence, empathy being one of those things that's on the list that we talk about a lot with our clients. And then the other piece of work we do is with individuals who are struggling with the imposter syndrome. So people who have realized a certain level of success in their lives, but are still feeling like they're not good enough. And again, supporting them to really work through that developmental gap in order to be able to integrate for themselves, to become really connected with who they are, who they're meant to be, what they are here for, and really make sure that they are fulfilling that path to that point of true satisfaction in their lives. So we have a little bit of a split focus to our particular practice, but we like the mix, and we enjoy the opportunity to really help people grow.
In that sense and everything, and I will bring up Anne, because Anne is here, and all along those lines. And this is for both of you, and I'm glad that you brought up the imposter syndrome, because one of the things that I talk about quite often on the online dinner party with a variety of guests, everybody, as you said from the email from me, oftentimes in the creative, entrepreneurial, and definitely the education space as well. And I know that I have said several times on this show, I will admit it, it being 62 and still in that single lane and all along those lines, that I am notorious for the imposter syndrome and the self-critic and all along those lines, because I know that there have been young ladies, whether it was back in my college days or even now in my 60s and even in the late 50s, that I did not pursue because I was too busy talking to myself, saying that no, they wouldn't be interested in me. There's no reason for me to go for that. And I can say the same even about nonprofits that I have worked for as well, where there have been artistic jobs that I have not gone for because I was having that whole conversation in our head. And a lot of us have that conversation in our head and everything. And by the time I got the guts to either approach the young lady or to approach the job people were like, no, that job went to Sally or Bob or whoever it was going to and everything. Or you go to the young lady and they're like, they moved on to the next person and all along those lines. So I know that we've all had this imposter syndrome. I'm thinking that even Mike, as a Christian leader, has probably had the imposter syndrome. And I know that Deb has, because we were talking about that earlier and everything. So I just wondering to all of you, how do you deal with that imposter syndrome? Because I am fascinated when I have different guests on the show. That is one of the popular topics that we talk about. How do you get past that imposter syndrome? Because it is something in my mind. We just came through a pandemic. As far as I'm concerned, bullying, which we have another show about, is a epidemic. And I think the imposter syndrome is at an epidemic level as well and everything. So I just want, and I'll start with the two of you, ladies, Heather and Ann, but I definitely want to hear from Deb and Mike as well. How do you get past that imposter syndrome? Any advice if there is another opportunity? I don't know of anything coming up in the near future in my entertainment world that might be a business opportunity, or if Miss Wright, or maybe even Miss Wright now, comes along and everything, that I can get past these imposter syndromes of mine and everything. So any suggestions that y'all have along those lines? Because I know that I am guilty of it totally.
Well, if I can just, without getting too complex about it, you know, to Deb's point earlier about what we get taught in school, we don't get taught the mechanics of our mind. And so most people don't understand that the first thing that we do is create a social persona to adapt to the world, and it protects us. And then we get the idea that that's who we actually are. And we're constantly judging and monitoring and seeing how we fit in and how we're like someone and how we're not like someone else and whether we're better or worse or whatever. But that's not who we are. That's our social persona. And until we wake up and realize that this is just protecting us from pain.
Can I pause you on that just for a minute? For a minute, because one of the things that I've heard about that social persona, I'm glad you brought it up, because I know a number of people, myself included, and friends of mine will talk about sometimes there is this notion of the various masks we wear. I know that sociologists and others talk about this oftentimes and everything. And sometimes we are wearing so many masks that we're not even 100% sure who the real us is and everything. So I do know that sometimes people will wear one persona for their family. They may wear another persona for their close associates. They may wear another persona for folks that are in their nemesis fields, for lack of a better term and everything. And they might wear another persona for just like the grocery store. Because I have some friends of mine that love going out to grocery stores and restaurants just to enjoy their social environment. So I have heard that. I had a friend that used to talk about this notion of a lot of us are walking around as, if I can use a science fiction term, as zombies and everything, because a lot of people are not 100% sure who they are.
Yeah, it's not so much that, it's that we get so caught up, and our energy gets so caught up in trying to be what other people want us to be, that, as you're saying, Mark, it's like we have multiple personas, and it's like changing our clothes depending on where we're going. And if we don't wake up to our authentic self and our own needs and our own, you know, spiritual, emotional, physical needs, those of our authentic self, then we're imposters. That is the imposter. It's our persona. It's not actually who we are. And most people will say, I feel like a fake, which of course the persona is a false self. It is not actually who we are. And having the courage to just emerge from behind those social masks that we wear, you know, to your point about being vulnerable earlier, it's a risk that we take, and walking down that path is not a path that everyone can take.
No, and in that same kind of direction and everything, and you come back to Mike, and I'll bring in the final guest, and we'll continue this conversation for at least another 30 minutes to an hour and everything along those lines, is in my mind, and like I said, I do not consider myself overly religious, but I definitely consider myself spiritual and everything. And to me, there is this notion that I don't know until the pandemic that we all started to think about ourselves in what I consider the four elements of us, which is the mental element, the physical element. I know me and Deb were talking earlier about the need to get in exercise. I know I've got to drop some pounds and all along those lines, even to this day. And then the other two that I know we don't spend enough time with, which is the emotional, and whether you want to call it religious or spiritual aspect of it, because to me, that is the four components of anybody. I mean, some people would call it the soul or whatever you want to call it in that term, analogy and everything. But definitely, I don't know that until the pandemic that we were spending as much time on that. And even now, I'm not sure that we're doing as much on that as we could and everything. But I'd love to hear everybody, including you two, with three ladies, as well as Mike's perceptives. And then, like I said, I'll bring in the final guests and we'll continue the conversation. But what is y'all perception around this? Because one of the things I've talked about on this show is this notion of trying to make sure that we are in alignment, because I am a big fan of alignment in terms of making sure that you are, as physically fit as you can be, that you're eating the right foods, but that you are also emotionally fit, mentally fit, and I would argue spiritually fit as well. But I was just wondering y'all's take on that. Anybody?
Well, I'll
It's
jump in
a
here.
lifetime. Go ahead, Mike.
Well, I was just going to say, I talk about this a lot in the men's community because men are really bad about this, this whole idea of wearing a mask and I'm going to keep up with the Joneses. Wow, they got 4 cars over there. I got to compete with that. I got to have the big house, and that will destroy you. And, really what it comes down to, I think, is identity. What's your identity? Who's your identity in? And I've gone down this road. I mean, I lost my identity for a while. I was a stay-at-home dad actually for a while. While I was going back, and I went back to school. I finished my college degree, got my master's degree, was doing all kinds of volunteer work, and then tried to go back in the job community and was met with absolutely nothing. And it darn near destroyed me, because as men, our identity is tied to, once somebody says, "What's your name?" they want to know what you do. Mm-hmm. And then everything's tied to that. And so a lot of times we'll either hide from that, or we will try to be something that we're not. And so this whole idea of fake it till you make it is really one of the most ridiculous sayings out there, which is a saying I carried with me for a long period of time. I was in sales and marketing early in my career, and that's a big thing that they like to talk about in sales and marketing. And it's more of an attitude than it is faking it, but I think this is a common thing that we talk about in the men's world, and it's about being vulnerable, and it's about being authentic. And you should be the same guy in front of your family as you are in front of your kids, and in front of your church, in front of your work. You don't switch hats off. That's a horrible way to live, and it destroys people.
But Mike, along those same lines and everything, I know that sometimes, because sometimes in society we get caught up in, and we were in the Deb were talking about this earlier, this polarization notion of why we need to be separating ourselves, whether it's on religious grounds or orientation grounds or sexual grounds or a number of other grounds as well, even the different ways that we divide ourselves. We were joking about it earlier with the sports teams and all along those lines. So that is going on. And then there is also a notion of materialism, because even though I know for a fact that blue collar workers do quite well, some of them do better than some of the doctors and lawyers, but you do have some people that are still out there, unfortunately, that are looking for that next doctor or that next lawyer in terms of their significant other or their spouse. And I'm not knocking that, but there are also some people that are still very materialistic and are looking for seeing what kind of house you got or what kind of car you got. You mentioned the cars earlier and all into that space. So unfortunately, that's still part of our society lexicon, and I think part of that is part of what we are here in this particular medium, which is media, and all along those lines. I think media kind of plays a part in that, but I don't know if you've got any thoughts around that. And I'm also going to bring in Brian, and there was one other guest. I said it was 2, but it was actually, I said it was 1, but it's actually 2. But I'll bring in Brian and see what he's got to say about some of these things as well. But I just wanted your take around the materialism aspect, because I do know that sometimes people will not pursue people because they're afraid that they're not driving the right car or not driving the right vehicle or living the right quote unquote life and everything.
you know, it's we sometimes have this notion that we're much more evolved than we actually are, but most of us are still at that level of, you know, in Maslow's hierarchy of needs is still really relevant around this topic, where even though we have met our physical needs and those lower level needs, that instead of going up and meeting more spiritual or esteem or aesthetic needs, we go back and try and recreate because that's what we know how to do. And so if I'm making a lot of money, I'm not thinking of, okay, I have enough money. I'm thinking of, how can I make more? Because we know how to do that. We don't want to move out of our comfort zone. And psychological safety is a big deal. You see, it's a big deal, but most people don't know what that means. And it is meeting our authentic need for both physical and material and relational, social, psychological. All of these needs must be met in order for us to venture out of our comfort zone.
No, definitely agree with you on that.
This is the same for men and women. This is a human experience. And to Mike's point earlier, what you were saying about, you know, men hiding out and not sharing themselves, you get a group of really successful women, business women in a room, they're 100% the same.
Yep.
And Heather can speak to that more.
Yeah, and it is that thing where, you know, when we sort of put some of these labels, and, you know, I think, Mark, you were talking a little bit about sort of the segregation of people and the identification as I'm this, or I'm with this group, I'm with that group. And it just made me think about that, you know, sort of again, from going back to Maslow's hierarchy of need, there's that social piece that we're looking for, and so many people are seeking a place to belong, right? In a place that feels safe and where they feel like, yes, these are my people, this is my tribe, if I can use that word, and that this is a place where, you know, I can really feel like I'm myself and I'm authentic, and no one's going to judge me, and no one's going to say, you know, what are you driving or what are you doing? They're more interested in me as a human being versus a human object. And I think that because there's a gap in there in our world where that need doesn't get satisfied, we start polarizing into these identifications, and, you know, or we resist. I mean, there are people who absolutely resist being labeled with anything, right? And so I think if we look at it from that perspective of what do we really need as human beings, as Anne was saying, there's so many of those needs that people don't understand because we don't like to be needy. Right. I was guilty of that. I used to say needs, what needs? I don't have any needs. I don't want to be a needy person. But if we don't connect with that at that fundamental level, we can't seek it out, and we find these false substitutes, and we continue to pursue those false substitutes to the detriment of ourselves and our health, and to the detriment of society as a collective, for sure.
No doubt about that and everything. Brian, if you'll share a little bit about yourself, and like I said, we got some other guests will be joining as well, but I'm enjoying this conversation. It's definitely something that we talk about regularly, and definitely as talked to y'all, I definitely got to hear about the work-life balance, because that's the other thing that we talk about regularly here on the Online Dinner Party, which is another conversation point, as well as one of those lovely words that I love, and I bring it up several times, that we are not good with. I know I'm not good with this as well, and it's only two letters, in some cases 3 letters, but a lot of us are horrible at that word called no, and all in that space. But I'd love to hear your thoughts, Brian, if you could share a little bit about yourself, and then I'll bring in Scotty as the final guest on this particular Online Dinner Party as well. But share a little bit about yourself and just some of what you've been hearing in this particular conversation.
Thank you so much for having me, Mark. It's my pleasure to be here with all the esteemed panelists and guests for your Online Dinner Party. I am a 30-year veteran in the American higher education scene, and you know, my claim to fame is that I made a 12 on the ACT, and I had to kind of struggle to get admitted and come up through the ranks and those kind of things. So going back to, you know, Mike's point about, you know, when you think about money, a lot of us in that fake it till you make it kind of attitude, you know, that was our mantra in college, right? We wanted to have the best car. We wanted to have the best clothes. Say nothing of the fact that we were broke, right? Young, dumb, and broke is how my wife characterized me back in, you know, 25, 30 years ago. Young, dumb, and broke, right? And but if we look good, right? If we kind of fit the mold of wherever it is that we thought we were supposed to be, or where we wanted to head to, and people kind of saw our outward presence, that gave us a bit of status and that gave us a bit of relevance, right? And so when I think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs and all the things that we do as humans, it's all about relevance. We want the car, we want the house, the clothes, the bow ties, the shoes, the hiking boots, or whatever it is that gives us some degree of relevance. And sometimes that's our mission and calling and what we do for our employment. Sometimes it's who we marry, but almost always is what's in our bank account or what is not in our bank account. We like to know that we can sleep peacefully at the end of the night, knowing that our bills are going to be paid and we're going to be set up pretty nice for retirement and some of those kind of things. Money matters, it really does. And almost anything that you do, all of us have probably heard you can't love won't buy your clothes, or love won't buy you groceries, or love won't buy this or that, but money can get you a lot of those things. So it all comes back down to relevance for me.
That makes a lot of sense, Brian. And along those same lines and everything, I know that as I was telling Deb earlier, one of the reasons that the network Pod TV was founded was both Nick Palveda and Kim Calhoun are big proponents of generational wealth and financial literacy. So they are definitely thinking that we're not teaching enough of that. So I was just wondering, because you mentioned that having that score that is actually a relatively low score, the ACT, what advice would you give to folks that are maybe getting into the athletic space? Because we know a number of athletes that are sometimes getting a windfall of cash and everything, but they may not know how to spend the money. And definitely for those folks that have been written off, because a lot of times people will think that somebody that is not academically inclined, that they are not worth the time to give them and everything, even though our vocational skills can definitely be very well. I had an uncle that passed away that his family ran a plumbing company, and I can tell you that some plumbers make more money than some of these brain doctors and some of the other doctors that are out there as well. But I was just wondering, what advice would you give to folks that are struggling? So I'll start with you, Brian. So what advice would you give to folks that are struggling, whether it's academically or in other aspects of their life?
I tell people all the time, you can do anything. If you're going to work and put your best ability forward in accomplishing your goals and tasks, you can do anything. Even if you got a 12 on ACT, even if you're dead broke, but you want to start a business or what have you, if you're going to work, if you're going to be disciplined, if you're going to be determined, if you're going to be dedicated, if you have a desire that's rooted in why this is important to you, you can accomplish anything you put your mind to. So that's my first piece of advice. When I think about all the young people today and those that I've worked with over the years that have come up and gone on to be surgeons and clergy and superintendents and some of those kind of things, a lot of them, they started with nothing, right? I mean, just the lowest of the low, but they had this confidence and this belief that they could successfully navigate the landmines and accomplish their goals and objectives if only they would do the work and get some degree of support from people like us who have some degree of know-how and the ability to invest in them in the accomplishment of their goals. So first and foremost, believe and know and trust that you can do anything you put your mind to.
I definitely agree with you on that. You can do anything that you put your mind to. I will tell you that one of the running jokes that I used to have, and I still do it to this day and everything, is that, like I had mentioned to Deb, and I'll mention it here on the show and everything, like many folks, even in those of us in our 60s, my cash can sometimes ebb and flow. And sometimes when it is doing more of the ebb than the flow, I will sometimes say that there's no need for me to put the ATM card in the machine and all along those lines, because the ATM is just going to laugh at me and all in that space, because it knows what I already know before I put that money or that card in the machine, that there is no money in there. So it already knows that it's going to start laughing at me. So I'm going like, there's no need to put that card in there, because it's just going to laugh at me, going like, you think you've got money in this card? You have totally lost your mind. There is no money in this cash whatsoever, and all along those lines.
We called it your money was funny. When your money was funny, you didn't have enough to make the ends meet and that kind of thing. Yeah, sure did.
Yeah, exactly. And all along those, I had mentioned earlier, like I said, we should have another 30, 40 minutes to go and everything. This notion of no, and I know that it is a very powerful word. It's a word that a lot of us don't like to use. It even comes up with that empathy conversation that we were talking about earlier. But sometimes you have to say no, including to some of your friends and acquaintances. But sometimes we as a people like to do what I think and would probably call people pleasing and all along those lines. But how can we get past that notion and go ahead and use that very powerful word, which is NO? It's only 2 letters, but sometimes we are so busy wanting to help folks and to be pleasing that I sometimes think, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, and as well as Mike's, that we sometimes suppress our own dreams. Because I've had a number of friends of mine that have tried to get me to do their dreams, and they weren't necessarily my own dreams, but they would try to get me to pursue their dreams and all along those lines. And I'm not saying you can't be supportive of your friends and acquaintances, but sometimes you got to know what your mission is. And if your mission isn't paralleling what the other mission is, then sometimes you have to just like step aside and not do it and all in that space. But I just wanted your take, and if anybody else wants to jump in there as well, because I know sometimes there are folks that want you to kind of stroke their dreams, and it might not be your own dream. But and you seem to have a lot of that background, so I'd love to hear your thoughts around that, and if anybody else wants to jump in.
Yeah, Heather and I talk a lot about this in the leadership arena, because there has been this whole orientation toward permissive leadership and permissive parenting, where nobody wants to say no to anybody, and leaders think that it's their job to make everybody happy, instead of managing their performance and helping them master their roles and their tasks. And I like that expression of when we say yes too often to people, we're actually saying no to ourselves, and that we're putting energy into that persona, that people-pleasing persona where, I say yes and everybody can depend on me, and my persona is I give till it hurts. But it's not authentic to who we actually are, because we end up neglecting ourselves, and we end up with physical, emotional, mental issues as a result of trying to be all things to all people by not being able to appropriately assert ourselves and appropriately grab that we actually are entitled to say no. It's just not, that it makes us a bad person if we say no, but we're entitled to put a boundary around things. Our time is valuable to us, and we can't keep saying no to ourselves without a consequence.
Yeah. Along those same lines, Deb, you've been quiet there for a minute, but I know sometimes that parents, and like I said, I'm not a parent, but I am an uncle, and I know definitely grandparents, because I got a number of friends that are grandparents as well. That is definitely a word that they do not have a good time saying, because a lot of times the kids will try to talk them into getting whatever the latest gift or the latest toy is, and all of those lines. So I'm just wondering, how do you deal with saying no? Because I'm sure that there are times that your grandkids who are now older and everything, but they were asking for the latest toy and everything. And I know that many of my friends that are grandparents are sitting there going like, hey, this is one of the hardest things that I got to do is tell them no, because you want to be supportive of them also.
Well, I have to agree with Ann. You have to say no. I would say with my own children, I was probably overindulgent, saying, oh, they got to like me. But I said, as I said, when Tim and I were it takes a lifetime to learn these things. People say, oh, I've got to know this. Well, it just takes a lifetime. And with my grandchildren, I had one time say, oh, what'd you bring me? And I said, I brought you me. I brought you me. My time is important. I said, this is it, And recently I had a little boy, I teach these classes, and he was really squiggly, and I said, hey, what's going on today? Well, I have ADHD. And I said, well, so do I. That doesn't give you permission to be, out of control all the time. You have to become responsible. And I love that. And you might know this name, or Heather. What's the autistic woman that is a PhD? Grandin, you know who I mean? Grandin.
Yeah, Sybil.
Not Sybil. Grandin.
Yeah, the one with the cows and stuff.
Yeah. Is it Sybil? Pardon me. I'm sorry, Brian. But anyways, her mother struggled with this child with autism, but she always insisted she had manners. And that's what I insist. You know what? I would always tell my kids, I don't care. I call them the 4 free spirits, but I'd say, first of all, when an adult comes in the room, you talk to them. You say, how do you do? And you talk to him, you ask him what's going on. Second of all, you learn self-respect. Now, do they all have it? Heavens no. They're now fit. I could be everybody's mother, and practically, except for maybe Mark. I don't know. But but my kids are like, 40s and 50s. But they kind of learned self-respect. And when they built their business, they gave back to the community. They understood that. And I'm not saying I have it right because, I could tell you stories. I mean, 4 of my 4 children, 3 of them called me from jail. So, but it was a wonderful lesson. They each learned something powerful about it. So this thing about no, we need to get over that. And you need to quit worrying about what everybody else thinks about you and become your own person. And then it doesn't hurt to say no. And it doesn't hurt to say yes. And I want to say one more thing, because Ann brought it up about our inability to be satisfied with life. I'm reading the Dopamine Nation. Has anybody read that yet? Oh my gosh. One of the things we have to realize is we're electrical magnetic fields and we're chemical reactions. Every thought is a chemical reaction. Go get Dopamine Nation and start to understand why we do the things we do. I said earlier, one of the things that we need to teach in schools is how our human operating system works. And it would really help. Mike, I have to tell you, I am so excited about what you're doing. I'd love to chat with you a little bit more about it because men do need that. Ann said that the older women in business, they're pretty much like men. But something about girlfriends, we can become a little bit more vulnerable. Maybe not in a big group, but in a small group, we save each other. And that's what men need too. And men need to learn to say no and to hear no.
I think I learned to say no is to hear no as well and everything. But I have heard from some of my business women colleagues that, and I don't know whether Ann and her business partner will agree and everything, but I've heard some people say, Ann and Heather, that some business women can be almost, and I'm saying all can be almost as toxic as some of the men because they kind of identify and kind of adapt that male business culture and everything. So I've definitely heard that from some of my friends that are women leaders, that sometimes they have run into as much problems from some of their fellow women advocates in the business community as they have from the men. So we know that there's the glass ceiling, and I'm not knocking the glass ceiling because the glass ceiling is very real and it does exist for women. We know that there is a serious pay gap, but I have heard that some women leaders are frustrated that they don't get the support that they would like from their fellow leaders. And I know I ran into this when I worked at a newspaper, and this was many years ago, back in the late 80s, but there was a gentleman when I worked at my one and only daily, well, I shouldn't say one and only because I did do some in a consulting basis or at a different basis, but on a daily basis working at a daily newspaper in Boca Raton, Florida. And there was a gentleman who was a African-American gentleman and definitely a fellow minority. And I felt that he put up a lot of roadblocks, not just for me, but for a Hispanic lady and other ladies, because he liked being the big fish in the small tank, if I can use that metaphor and everything. And I've heard that from some women leaders as well. So I just wondering, Ann and Heather, if you can speak to that, because I have seen that even in the year 2024. We're in the 21st century, so I'm talking about something that happened in the late 80s, but it is still very prevalent, I think, even to this day and everything. But I was wondering, as leadership coaches, if you can talk to that, because I do think some people get a position of power and versus sharing or nurturing the person and helping to coach them along, they throw up roadblocks. And I'm not saying that's always the case, but I have seen it way too often in my life and in the lives of friends and associates of mine. But I'd love to hear y'all's take on that.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what both Ann and Deb are talking about, and this whole notion of really understanding our own operating model, that brain, that wonderful brain that we have that directs our behavior and directs our responses. And, most leaders, most individuals don't have that level of self-awareness. I mean, they do a much better job today starting to introduce it into the high school program. At least certainly that was my experience as my kids went through high school. My daughter had probably done the Myers-Briggs more times in her first through high school and into university than I had ever done by the time I was out of university. And so there is sort of a little bit more of an orientation to it, but that lack of understanding of, why do I behave the way I do? How is it that my behavior is different? So as a female whose brain style is more typically what we call masculine, it's very challenging. Even as a kid growing up, it's like, I want to hang with the boys. I don't want to hang with the girls, right? I couldn't connect and relate. And there was always this idea that I should behave a particular way because I was a girl, when that wasn't my nature. And so we start very early trying to condition kids against sometimes some norms are now counter to any norms. So that kind of leaves the kids just as lost. Am I, living out of someone else's idea or agenda, or who am I authentically? And when we deal with leaders who are in our environment, in our world, where they are behaving in the way, Mark, that you're talking about, is they don't understand what's going on inside of themselves that causes them to feel that need to be that self-protective, right? It's like, so that devaluing of others, that sort of, working that agenda is, I want to elevate myself so I feel safe and secure, but it's at the expense of others. And that lack of self-awareness, that lack of other awareness. And we have clients that have been in leadership roles for a really long time, and they know nothing about their leadership style, why they behave the way they do, why they react the way they do, why they, avoid things that they avoid, and that's the big gap, right? Is we talk about, and I think, Deb, these are some of the things that you're going after, where, helping people really at a very early age start to be more introspective, so that we understand how our brain works, how our brain is wired for survival, and what that means for us. The fact that our hardwiring means our emotional brain is more of the driver, which means I'm going to act out of impulse. But we need to build up the executive functioning and build those neural pathways. And what does that mean? And what does that look like? Hey, parents, stop letting your kids do whatever they feel like doing. Help them build their executive functioning so that as adults, they can actually work towards their goals and objectives effectively. And so there's lots of gaps in there. What's really cool, though, I think, is that how much more we know today than we did 20 years ago. Like, just the advances that we've had, from when we started doing this work, or when I started doing this work, 25, 30 years ago, to what we know now around everything from behavior and what's driving the behavior, personality type, how our brains are organized, what that means from a, neurological mapping. We can look at sort of what's going on in people's brains, some of the research that's been done around particularly kids with ADD around this, what we understand about learning disabilities. And, there's just so many advances. I think where we struggle, though, at least that's our experience, is we have all of this knowledge, man, we're so good at generating and collecting knowledge. We don't see that translation into day-to-day life in the way that, we're all out there pushing it so that people are using it, working with it, and integrating it. Because I know, having two kids with ADHD and one with dyslexia, I was shocked at how few teachers they experienced that actually knew how to teach and support those kids, despite all of the knowledge and all of the expertise that's out there on those subjects today.
But that's part of the problem, Heather, is that, and I've said it on this show, so I'm not speaking out of school, and my parents don't mind when I bring it up and everything, but I actually have what is considered dysgraphia, which is like a form of dyslexia. Me and right and left are always not the best of friends and all along those lines. But I didn't actually find that out till after I had gone through college, gone through high school, gone through a number of other things. And even to Brian's point and everything, I am still convinced to this day, because I have a very sorry, and I will admit it, handwriting and everything. So I'm convinced to this day that there were teachers that let me get by on certain papers because they couldn't decipher what I was writing. So they figured it must be good in some form or fashion. So we just go ahead and at least give them an A. They weren't going to be bold enough to give me an A, but they at least gave me a B or a C, because they translated enough in order to realize that I had addressed whatever the point was and all along those lines. But in terms of getting to the fine points, they were probably like, I can't read this, so I'm not even going to bother trying to decipher this. So they probably let me skate on that kind of attitude and all along those lines, because I know even to this day my handwriting is not the best. Some people have compared it to a doctor's handwriting, and we all know what a doctor's handwriting could look like, and all along those lines. But definitely, I know that happened to me. So even though it is stuff that is definitely out there, whether it's autism or dysgraphia or dyslexia or a number of other things, I don't know that it is out there as much. And I also sometimes feel that it is overly diagnosed, because I had a ex, and I had a number of exes, but one of the exes many years ago, her son, who is now well into his adult years, and I've lost total touch with him, he was had some similar kind of issues. I think he had autism or one of those other kind of diagnoses and all in that space. But then he was given Ritalin at a very young age, and that Ritalin probably impacted him even to this day and everything. So I think that sometimes we overly diagnose our students because in my mind, and maybe it's because I got 2 teenage nephews and everything, and I got friends that are that have teenage kids as well as young adult kids. I don't know a young adult yet that isn't hyper to some degree or another. So those of you that are parents, you probably can relate because I have yet to see a kid that doesn't have some level of hyperactivity in their life. So not saying that some kids don't need diagnosis, but I do think that sometimes we overly diagnose. But I don't know if y'all agree or disagree.
Well, I think to that point, Mark, it's that basic understanding that the brain doesn't finish developing until we're in our mid-20s.
Right.
And so if that's the case and our executive function hasn't developed, this is why parents still need to be facilitators of their teenage children, because the executive function just isn't there, and those sorts of impulsive behaviors need to be expected. Daniel, forget his last name, Siegel wrote a fabulous book called Brainstorm, if any of you have read it, which really talks about the changes in the brain and the devolution away from rational thought to more impulsive, emotionally, socially driven behavior during that period. And that if we don't expect them to be that way, because gosh, my child's an angel and they never would rebel, if we don't expect it, we don't prepare ourselves as parents for what we need to do to adapt our parenting style to keep our kids safe.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that and everything. This is for you, Brian, and like I said, we probably got about another 15, 20, 25 minutes to go and everything, and there's a question that I ask everybody at the end of these shows and all along those lines. But one of the things that I've talked about on a number of these shows, and I'd love to hear your thoughts around this, Byron, because you kind of mentioned it with your wife and all along those lines, but this is for everybody. Like I said, I'm still in that single space and living in a one room apartment in terms of the bedroom and all along those lines. So it does have to worry as much about the work-life balance, but when you got multiple jobs, you do still have to worry about the work-life balance and all along those lines. But I was just wondering, how do you deal with that work-life balance? Because you mentioned having a significant other who probably still guides you to some degree, because you mentioned some of the things that they have told you about your own change in life and how their view of you and everything. But I just wondered, how do you do that work-life balance and all in that space, particularly as you are an entrepreneur as well as a number of other things also? So I just wondered, how do you balance that work-life balance, Brian? And then I'd love to hear from the other panelists as well.
It's quite different. Years ago, I was a workaholic. I would, I'd be first one in, last one out. And I might leave the office at 8 o'clock, 8:30 or whatever, and, try to make the best of life. But as, I've been married 23 years now. I got a 26-year-old son. I got a 14-year-old son. And so as I've grown in the business and in the profession, I do less of that workaholic type of approach. And, I go in and I dedicate my time and I do whatever I can get done in a day. Every now and again, I'll have to push the envelope and stay well beyond the normal 8-9 hours a day of work. But when I leave, I leave. I kind of check out and go home and spend time with my wife and my family and things of that nature. It's important to me that I always have an opportunity to sharpen my professional saw. I'm reading a number of different books and stuff right now. I just finished writing my book entitled Finding Myself, A Journey from the Projects to the PhD. I try to play a little golf every now and again, a couple times a week if I can. And, just kind of take care of myself, because I've come to realize over 30 years that, if for whatever reason, if I left the industry tomorrow, right, there'd be a process for getting somebody else into my role within a matter of weeks and certainly a month or two. So I got to invest in me the same way I have invested in the business and in the institution, and bringing my very best to myself, just like I bring the very best to the jobs and the career that I've had over the last 30 years. So, I try to make sure I always can get it in. I'm going here, I'm going there. I'm spending time with my 14-year-old. We were talking about no a moment ago, and my 14-year-old came home from first grade one day, and he was just crying to the high heavens and saying that everybody was treating him bad and they were mean to him and that kind of stuff. And I thought the kid was getting bullied, right? And so I had to get down to a 6-year-old level, right? And I said, "Oh, okay, Alex, tell me exactly what was it, what happened, exactly what happened, what did they do to you to be mean to you?" And he said, "They kept telling me no and stop."
And that's it. Well, along those same lines, I have a similar story that you will. Yeah, I have a similar story that you will enjoy, Brian, and everything, because my nephews, who are now about to be 15 and 16 in August of this year and everything. But when I believe it was the younger one, I don't think it was the older one, they were playing soccer. They're still very active in soccer to this day and everything. And I remember that they were literally playing the game. I want to say they were winning, then they were doing well in the game. And all of a sudden, and the next thing I know, because I had gone to that particular game, I saw that particular nephew throwing a temper tantrum. And myself and my parents, his grandparents were all there, and his aunt was there, and a number of other people. And we were like, "Well, why are you having a temper tantrum? What's going on? Y'all are doing good. Y'all are winning." And he sat there and he paused and he got into a little bit of tears, and he's like, "But we kind of stopped playing." So that's why he was having a temper tantrum, because he literally had to stop playing the game. So he was enjoying himself so much that he did not want to quit.
But yeah.
Excuse me a minute. Oh, I'm sorry. If I could be next, I'm a grandmother that's still active, and I have to pick up somebody at the bus in a little bit.
No problem. We're going to wrap up in a few minutes. So definitely I was going to have you be next and all along those lines. There's a question I asked everybody, so we're going to get to that as well. So we're getting to wind down shortly anyway and everything. But one of the things that I am curious about, but definitely I'd love to hear from you, Deb, about the work-life balance and how you get past that work-life balance, because I alluded to earlier, and as Adrian Byron alluded to as well, there is 24 hours in a day. It hasn't changed since we got the clock the way that it is currently put out there and all into that space. But, sometimes you want there to be 26 hours or 30 hours, but it's not changing. There's 24 hours in the day, and you need at least, depending on who you're listening to, and I've had some sleep experts even on this show and everything, you need at least 6, even though some people will argue that you might need 7 or 8 hours of sleep, and you need some time for yourself and everything. So in terms of the work day, there's definitely a limited amount of work time and everything. Even though I know some folks that are dreaming that there would be a 28-hour day. That hasn't happened. You just mentioned that you got to go pick up your kids. So there's even some of those responsible grandkids. So there's even some of those responsibilities as well. So Deb, how do you deal with the work-life balance? Because you got to deal with not just your balance, but also that of your grandkids, and I'm assuming your kids and maybe some of the other people in your life.
Yeah, well, I got retired at 65, and then I decided to do my full-time business. And what has been good, because I pushed and I did everything, and difficult and just it was all like exhausting. And finally I always say my children raised me, and then I started growing up on my own. And one of the things that I teach my kids in my program is that we all have a good, powerful system. It's your GPS, it's your intuitiveness, it's your natural intelligence and all of that sort of thing. And I started to really connect with that and realize, like, some days, like for instance, today I was supposed to have a 12-year-old here. We were going to be recording a story, and something in me this morning said, you know what, I think I'm going to cancel that. And I had forgotten about this dinner party. And I was working, and all of a sudden I look out, a dinner party. What? Oh, and I'm just so thrilled to have been here with such beautiful human beings. And I want to say, maybe we don't all have it yet, humans, but you're all seeds, seeding this world into a better place, into a beautiful place, and to be here with you just uplifts me. And that's what I'm always looking for, is to elevate my state of being. So I'm looking at joy, and I'm looking at happiness, and I'm looking at things, and when the challenges come, I try to figure them out from that state if I can. But it's difficult, and it takes a life, it takes a lifetime to get all this going. But I just want to thank you for this opportunity, Mark.
No problem. And the other thing that I get everybody to do, so just really quickly, and this is for everybody, and along those lines, as we start to wrap up in the next 10 or 15 minutes, but I know you got to walk out the door and everything. But one of the things that I love that all my guests doing is to give a message of positivity, because as I said before, Pod TV is a global network. So there are people watching literally, whether it's now or in team rerun, as a friend of mine calls it, on his show and everything. So they'll be watching. So any message of positivity that you can give to our global community, and if you can tell folks how they can reach you, and any parting words that you would like to share, and all in that space. And that's probably what I get everybody to do eventually as well. But since you're the first one heading out the door in the dinner party, if you can share that, I'd love to have that from you, Deb.
Yes, my advice is slow down. Just plain slow down. We all just rush, rush, rush. Oh, I've got to hurry this. I'm only 73 and I've only got 20 more years left. It all just comes. I mean, look at nature. It just slow down and just enjoy life. It's so wonderful. And my program is on lifeingredients.com. And it's for children anywhere from 5 to 12. And we have short little lessons and we do calm mind sessions. And I hope everybody will take an opportunity to just take a look at it. And thank you all. And Deb at lifeingredients.com. Please send me an email, you guys. And I'd love to connect with each and every one of you. So thanks, Mark. This was just stunning. What a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.
No problem. Glad that I could do that and all along those lines and everything. Brian, if you can share a little bit about your own thoughts and things that you want to share and all along those lines. Like I said, we got about another 10 or 15 minutes, but definitely I oftentimes think about the notion of people that are coming up from the bottom. And, there are people that will argue that the Horatio Alger story doesn't necessarily exist, but I would say that you are an example of a Horatio Alger story, even from our African-American community and all along those lines. But I just wanted your take on that, and particularly for those people that are thinking that you can't make it from the bottom, because I know there's some people here in Durham that have done quite well from the projects and all along those lines. And by the way, Brian, I've got to teach you because my brother, who I alluded to earlier, is now working on his PhD, but for a while he was in college and he was on what I call the 25-year plan. So he was definitely going to college trying to figure out what he wanted to be when he grew up, and everything went into a couple of different majors. And now he's very active in helping our quote unquote at-risk youth, a term that I don't necessarily like, because I think that we need to be encouraging them and not necessarily thinking of them as being at risk and everything. But definitely I know that that is a popular term and all along those lines. But I just wanted your take and advice for those that are maybe living in the projects that are thinking that they cannot escape, because even here in Durham, we have some quote unquote project-like areas. But what is your take for those folks that might even be escaping the gangs and other things as to how they can get out of those environments?
My take is, there's a rap artist by the name of Nasir Jones, and he wrote this song called Project Windows. And the essence of the song was living in the projects and looking out those project windows. He felt so uninspired. And there are a million ways to ascend from the projects, but there are really no signs to say how to get out, right? How to, find your way out of the projects. And, some of us will be fortunate enough that we can figure some things out, and others not so much. The first thing that I advise people is to think about, what would you do if you knew you could not fail, right? If you knew that you could be successful at almost anything, what would it be that you aspire to get accomplished? And I liken it, believe it or not, to bottled water. We pay $4 or $5 a gallon for bottled water. We don't pay that much for gasoline, right? And all of that is because somebody somewhere believed that they could sell water in a bottle. Water was already free. It was second most abundant element in all of God's creation. Free. You could go to any park and there's a water fountain. Go to any restaurant, they give you a bottle of water, right? Now people are selling water because they realize they can, So thinking about what is it that you would do if you knew you could not fail, and what's the very first step towards bettering yourself? What's the very first step toward getting that done, accomplishing that goal, right? And once you get that first step, then okay, from here you go where, et cetera, et cetera. And little by little, over time, you'll be able to accomplish those goals as soon as you realize that you're going to have to put in the work. You're going to have a desire, as I mentioned earlier, and that desire has got to have a why. Why is it important to you? For me, my why was all about providing for my family one day, being able to take care of my kids and my wife, and making sure that they didn't know life the way I had known it growing up, right? That was my why. And discipline, being able to go to work and go to class or do whatever it is that you need to do when you don't necessarily want to do that thing. In the college world, it's cold and raining today in Alabama. And and some students will say, well, gee, it's too cold to go to class. And, tomorrow it'll be 80 degrees and it'll be pretty and sunny. it's too pretty to be sitting in class. And, you know, I've come to the resolve that those students just don't want to go to class, right? they don't want to go to class when it's pretty. They don't want to go to class when it's cold and rainy. They don't want to go to class. And so they don't necessarily have the discipline that's needed to accomplish the goals. Some people need to be dedicated to accomplish those goals, right? And it particularly if you're coming out of a station in life like where I was in the projects, you have to be dedicated. You can't divide your time and your attention to 1,000 different things, right? You have to, if you're going to go to Bronx College of Medicine or, you know, Harvard or Kentucky or wherever it is that you may end up enrolling, right? You can't work 20 jobs and, you know, hang out with some of the same people that you've always hung out with and do some of those things that you've always done. You have to be dedicated and assign your time and attention to the most important tasks and priorities that are in front of you to help you little by little get to the accomplishment of those goals. And then, of course, I mentioned determination, right? Nothing gets you off that road. If you're deciding that you're going to go to college or you're going to be a doctor, or maybe you're going to go to the armed services, or maybe you're going to start that plumbing business that you talked about, whatever that goal is for you, you have to be determined to seeing that through. If you're going to get to this space where, you know, having funny money or faking it till you make it, or some of these other things that we've talked about today is going to be enough to get you off the road, then maybe that's not the goal for you. You know, so all of those things in my mind are first and foremost for ascending above, you know, the circumstances that you might have been born into or found yourself relegated to, you know, as it relates to accomplishing goals.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense and everything. And like I said, as we're going to wrap up, and I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I hope that all of you will come back on another dinner party and we can continue these conversations. But like I was saying to everybody, and I'll start with you, Mike, and everything, as you at the second end of the door, and Deb was the first one and everything. If you can tell folks how you can be reached and any message of positivity that you would like to share. And definitely, I would love to have you come back on to even share some of the other things that we've talked about today. And this goes for everybody and all along those lines. But if you have a message of positivity that you want to share, as well as how you can be reached and how folks can learn more about the men's groups that you are part of as well.
Yeah, sure. The best way to get a hold of me is to go to my website, truemanlifecoaching.com, and you'll find my podcast on there, the books that I've been a part of, my blog, and that's just kind of where we try to keep everything. And you can connect with me on all my social media, and you can always send me an email at mike@truemanlifecoaching.com. You know, one of the things that I talk about quite a bit, because I think it's an important thing to talk about in the men's community, and I recently wrote about this in a collaborative book that I was a part of, is the power of asking for help. Mm-hmm. This happened to me at a certain point when I was very, very young. I stopped asking for help. I went into glasses at a very young age and had a number of people say to me, well, you're pretty smart. You look smart, right? And so if you look smart and you're introverted, you can't raise your hand and ask for help because that wouldn't be smart, right? That's how I internalized it. And that went well into my adulthood. And so what I've learned over that time is that it's important to ask for help. It's important to have people around you that are willing to help and ask a lot of questions and be curious in your life. And I think all of those things combined together will help get you where you want to go. So that's my message of hope.
I definitely agree with that and everything. Heather and Ann, if you can share your message of hope and all along those lines and ways that y'all can be contacted with your organization. And like I've said several times, I would love to have both of you come back on, because like shows run anywhere from an hour and a half to an hour and 45 minutes. But definitely, I've thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. I hope y'all have enjoyed it as well. I love moderating and mediating these discussions and love having these important conversations. But I'll start with you, Heather, but definitely want to hear from Ann as well. But definitely, if you can tell a message of positivity and how you can be reached and all along those lines.
Yeah, I'll start with the message of positivity. One of the pieces that I think makes so much of a difference for us as human beings is really taking that step to invest in understanding kind of who we are, how we're wired, who we're meant to be, and doing that kind of work of understanding and being able to take in that information about ourselves. And that is, it's almost like going at that place of giving ourselves permission to be authentic. And we start that journey by looking in and not looking out. And so always encourage that there is so much power that we have in our lives by really accepting who we are, right? And what that means for us. And as someone who works in this space, and Anne and I have developed a personality system called the Striving Styles that really helps people to navigate that. Our first book, Who Are You Meant to Be, also is the roadmap for that. But it's that place. I remember the first time for me where, coming to this place of going, oh, I get it. Like my own user manual, I get why I feel this way, why I react this way, why I am this way. That whereas, and that helps us push all of those external messages out from our childhood, from our conditioning, even things that we might be receiving as adults, to start to look at ourselves in that more objective way. And when, I joke about it, but I make comments in my life where I understand how I'm wired and I'm so confident about it that I will say that my self-esteem is not tied to whether I baked cookies for my kids to take to school or I bought them from the store, right? It's like, I'm okay with that. That's not how I'm wired. Lots of other people are wired in a different way, and that's okay. But I know me, and I don't have to pretend to be something other than I am. So really, if you haven't done that yet, take that first step. And the last one I just want to add to that is never forget that we're human beings, which means we grow in relation to others. So much like building on Mike's message that, ask for help. It's the journey is not meant to be done alone. The journey is meant to be done as you've done here, Mark, bringing us all together to talk and to share and to grow and to learn from each other. It's the same for us as human beings. And we try and go off in the corner and figure it all out ourselves. We often end up finding ourselves stuck and not getting where it is that we ultimately need to go. And whether that's through reading books, listening to podcasts, watching shows like this, working with somebody one-on-one, as Mike does in his practice, as we do in ours, there's opportunity for there to grow. But remember, it is done in relation to others. So in terms of connecting with us and reaching out for us, all of our resources, including our books, tons of great content that we have on our YouTube channel, our podcast, which is all about dismantling dysfunction, can be found on our website, and it's DuranetSaris-Hilliard.com. So hopefully that'll be in show notes, because I know it's a little bit of a mouthful to spell, or you're catching it off of the video here. Also, you can catch us on social media, LinkedIn. Both Anne and I are there, so I'll preempt Anne on this piece, or you can email us directly. You can reach me at heather@caliberleadership.com, and love to hear from your audience and love to stay connected and keep this conversation going. So thanks again.
No problem. Glad to do it. Definitely want to hear from Anne as well as we close out the door. And then I've got a commercial that involves a food item that might make all of you hungry, because we're getting ready for the dinner and actually get ready for dinner here. But I think it's one of our dessert ones, if I remember correctly, on this particular brand folder. And all along those lines, I can tell you, and I can tell both of you and Mike, that one of the things that the network does is regularly is that, with the permission of those that allow it, because I was actually talking to Cameron Bobo, who's on our Bullion show and everything, that we love repurposing things on our network. We do that with the Skeptic Metaphysicians and with others as well. So if either you or Mike, or those of you that have YouTube channels, wanting to repurpose on the network, I can tell you that we can gladly do that, because that's something that I do regularly, and that helps people get the word out and everything. So I'm asking for the permission. So if you want if you grant me the permission, you might find yourself being repurposed on the network later on as well and everything. So that goes to both you, Mike, and Heather, and even Brian, as he got content as well.
Good.
Yeah.
So
Cool.
I'm very glad that Heather gave all of the contact information, so I don't have to. The words of positivity, and I like to introduce the idea of, in the beginning of our lives, we try really hard to become who we think we should be and to achieve certain material goals and other goals in our lifetime. But as we get older, we learn this, or we don't learn this, that in Jung's terminology, we begin the process of individuating. And I really recommend that, as Heather and I do with our clients, we help people identify and achieve their potential, not achieve their goals. It's an internal thing where, you know, in Campbell's Hero's Journey, we look at it as the assignment. And each of us has an assignment in our lives. And once we're on purpose, there's nothing more fulfilling or energizing than to be in the service of our assignment. And that's different for everybody. So there's no career counseling on what job that you can do. It's just getting so connected with yourself and your gifts, your talents, your abilities, your spirit and your connection to spirit, that we know that we're living on purpose. And so Joseph Campbell's book, The Hero's Journey, it's a great way of starting off this process for people who are just looking at a way of getting to know who they are and who they're meant to be, as to Heather's point about getting to know how they're wired by using the striving styles. An instrument like that will say, this is what you need. You as a human being, you're wired like this. And if you try and be any other way, it's going to cause emotional, psychological dysfunction in you.
Yeah,
So-
no doubt about that and everything. And I appreciate that message from all of you and everything. Like I said, I'm gonna play this minute and a half commercial that is actually from a lady that goes to the African American farmers market. I believe it's in Raleigh and everything, but it is vegan desserts. And every time that I see this commercial, it makes me hungry and all along those lines, but it is vegan dessert. So don't get too much mad at me and all along those lines. I think that the rest of you may be having the same reaction when y'all see this commercial, because it looks very delightful, despite the fact that it is a vegan, whether you're vegan or not. And I'm definitely not vegan, because I will go to KFC and some of the other meat places on a regular basis. But even though this is vegan dessert, it's also very delicious looking dessert. So we're going to walk out the door with this particular commercial and all along these
No
lines.
judging, no judging.
And look forward to having you back on in the near future. So we get ready to go out with this particular commercial.
Hi, my name is Maria Jones, baker and owner of Very Vegan, a premier mobile bakery specializing in putting a plant-based spin on some of your favorite desserts. Inspired by my own personal experience with my journey with healthier eating habits, I was determined to make comparable items with desirable textures and great taste. We're always experimenting with different flavor profiles and expanding our menu. I enjoy my creative license, as well as imparting ideas and requests from my customers. It makes for new and exciting items. Some of our customer faves are the specialty cheesecakes, such as the banana pudding with homemade vegan vanilla wafers, strawberry crunch, honey bun, fruity pebbles, peach cobbler, and many others. We also offer moist, rich cupcakes, delectable cookies, decadent brownies, and scrumptious pound cake. Discover how amazingly delicious vegan can be. I am available for orders, or you can purchase my items exclusively at the Black Farmers Hub.